This video is dedicated to anyone who said that I won't be taken seriously because I call Nazis sad nerds. No. This video is why I won't be taken seriously. It's October and October is Halloween month, so I wanted to cover a spooky topic. In fact, the spookiest topic of all. The exploitation of the proletariat by the capitalist class. Section 1. Introduction. I need to talk about a really serious issue here that I've seen in a lot of games now. This is something that's honestly holding back a lot of 8 or 9 games from being solid 10s. There are just pieces of media here, pieces of art that are compassionate and clever and rich, but they fall down again and again in this one place. I'm talking about the Adam Driver creator. It takes me sometimes 2 or even 3 hours to make something even vaguely resembling Adam Driver. Or in some cases, I never make anything all that close, and I think we can all agree that's totally unacceptable. I come into so many games excited, but I'm playing and I'm just so distracted by what a poor Adam Driver the game let me create. Pitiful. Do better, Bloodborne. What we need here is clearly a multiple point system to create a nose shape, a jawline, a general face shape. You know, the wide upper jaw, the square chin, that NASA rocket nose. A set of sliders isn't going to cut it in some cases. I can't even make his ears stick out. What kind of Adam Driver am I going to create if I can't even make his ears stick out? No kind of Adam Driver at all. From Software, I'm talking to you directly now. Ditch all of your existing facial hair presets. I can see what you were going for. Some of them are pretty close to actual facial hair Adam Driver has, but some of them, geez, a full beard? When has Adam Driver ever worn a full beard? Ridiculous. And the hairstyles? I mean, 1 or 2 of them. There's a pretty good Kylo Ren in there, but where's the weird bowl cut? Nowhere. That's where. 3 out of 10. Bloodborne was released in 2015 by From Software. It's an installment in the From Software Soulsborne series, although it may or may not actually take place in the same universe as Dark Souls and Demon Souls. Unlike other games, Bloodborne is set in a city resembling an 1800s European city, for example, Victorian London. We all have things we're afraid of, and that's a provable fact, because nearly all of them are in Bloodborne. Bloodborne has some horrible critters in it, but luckily for me, the thing I'm most afraid of didn't make the final cut.
I X the flower into the bowl. And I X the flower into the bowl.
Bloodborne is enormously popular. It's almost universally hailed as totally fantastic. Almost everywhere I've seen it reviewed and rated, it has over 90% approval from the gaming community. Let's see if we can change that. Bloodborne is an allegory for how capitalism ruins everything. Section 2. Aggressive readings. Why is this here? Is it because it's the Bloodborne Halloween Spooktacular? Or is it because Natalie threw a cup full of coffee at the wall? In Sinistar, or How to Play Games Wrong, Big Joel explains quite adeptly why authorial intent and video games have a really strained relationship. I think that's the best way to describe it. The author's intentions aren't completely absent from games, but they just have a really strained relationship. Authorial intent never really got to achieve everything it wanted, and it has this degree in art history, but video games is the one paying the bills, so they always do what video games wants to do, and authorial intent is always trying to get video games to notice something really clever it's done, and video games feel stressed at work because it has this dickhead boss, and you're in the back of the car while there's all this tension between them, and you don't understand why, and you already asked authorial intent earlier if you could go to Blockbuster, and it said no, but you thought you might get a different answer if you asked video games, and you didn't mean to make them start fighting again, you just really wanted to go to Blockbuster. I'm sorry, I just need a minute. So I'd like to talk about how I sometimes read something aggressively. What I basically mean by this is, sometimes it's okay to know that the author of a piece doesn't have the intention you're talking about. If you can demonstrate that the reading of a piece of media you're putting forth has some value, then it's a good reading. I want to use this term, an aggressive reading, separately to Death of the Author, because the assumption that Death of the Author sets out to counter is that the author's intention is the correct interpretation of the work. And the way a lot of people use Death of the Author now is to argue why their interpretation is the correct one. An aggressive reading isn't supposed to be the correct interpretation, just a valid interpretation. A lot of you may be asking,
isn't this just an excuse to insert your shitty political hot takes into video games with no accountability?
Because video games and authorial intent have such a strained relationship, I think they're a really ideal medium to apply this analytical concept. The case I want to examine today is of course a reading of Bloodborne. I'll say once again, I'm not trying to claim this is what Bloodborne is about, but I just think this reading has some value. Here's the interpretation. Bloodborne is an allegory for the exploitation of the worker under capitalism. Before we get around to that though, I'd like to look at a couple of examples of aggressive readings to just get totally on the same page. It'll be easier to get my point across if I can relate it to a piece of media everyone knows really well, so of course, I'm going to talk about the mobile app game Idle Miner Tycoon. Idle Miner is an app game in the popular genre known as idle clickers. The idea being that the main interaction with the game is simply clicking. At first you click to gather in-game currency, and then after some time you use the currency to buy things that make your clicking redundant, therefore allowing you to be idle. This is an absolutely huge game genre, and it has been for a few years now. YouTuber Simulator was really popular a while back, I think. I don't know, I didn't really play it. When I want to accurately simulate being a YouTuber, I play Overwatch on Twitch and say racial slurs. A lot of idle clicker games are those basic mechanics I just discussed, but plus some in-app purchases for if you want to skip ahead and not have to wait as long, dressed up in some sort of narrative or other aesthetic disguise. I say disguise because the window dressing of an idle clicker game is the only thing that distracts you from the fact you're just wasting time clicking on a screen and occasionally handing over your money to developers for essentially nothing. And that's where Idle Miner Tycoon comes in. Idle Miner Tycoon is a game where you click to set up, you guessed it, a mine, and then click more to use the profits to expand your mine or set up more mines. Partly because Idle Miner has such a simple premise with no story to speak of, the mining premise seems oddly metaphorical, as if the game is saying that the players paying money for in-app purchases or clicking on ads are the miners, creating revenue for the mine owner representing the developers by just clicking away after the developers made the initial effort of setting up the mine. It's also partly because the mining industry has a really long history of exploitation and abuse and battles between workers' unions and capitalist bosses. I guess I just want to know why all the miners look so happy. No real miner has ever been this happy to be getting black lung. What world is this set in? I actually looked into it, and it's made by a company called Fluffy Fairy Games, based in Berlin. Fluffy Fairy Games only have one other game, but they appear to still be active, so I feel like we might see more of the same in the future. But Eric, you can't just assume they're going to keep making the same stuff. Good point, Imaginary Contrarian, except that the other game Fluffy Fairy made is called Idle Factory Tycoon. Again, thin aesthetic veil over idle clicker mechanics. Again, oddly self-aware metaphor for worker exploitation. I did have to go check these games weren't actually some kind of satire, because honestly, why do they keep picking like Dickensian forms of labour as their idle clicker premises? That's exactly my point though. That perfect self-satire wasn't their intention. There's an interview with the creators in which they discuss making idle clickers as a quick, easy way to make games that turn a profit, with one of them even describing idle clickers as essentially a spreadsheet with an interface. Hopefully with this example you can see the benefit of my aggressive reading. Definitely not the author's intentions, but what serves as a better metaphor for the way that idle clickers like Idle Miner squeeze profit out of users than Idle Miner itself. Now, since I always have to be a Debbie Downer, let's look at an example of aggressive readings being used for evil! And by evil I mean shitty homophobic nonsense. In 1954, Frederick Wertham published Seduction of the Innocent, the Influence of Comics on Today's Youth. Seduction of the Innocent isn't the gripping thriller that you may have first thought it to be. It's instead a long screed against comics from a pearl-clutching garbage person. Think all the people who today say that video games are making young people violent only 60 years earlier and about comics instead. Wertham claimed that Wonder Woman's strength and independence from men made her a lesbian, which no dude, being raised on an island of women made her a lesbian. He also claims there is a subtext of BDSM fetish play in Wonder Woman, which firstly the creators were fairly open about, and secondly, Frederick, I thought you were trying to make me like comics less. He even called Superman un-American and fascistic. Superman? Un-American? Wertham's clearly never read the issue where the American government puts Superman in prison as a baby. What I really want to talk about though, is the claim that Wertham made that Batman and Robin contains a subtext for a homosexual relationship. This spawned decades of cheap, lazy, homophobic jokes about Batman and Robin, and probably forever tarred a father-son dynamic that was supposed to be a wholesome and positive relationship for not just children but also parents to learn from. The lesson to take from this example is that aggressive readings of media have their place, and that as a valid interpretation instead of the correct one, they shouldn't be attached to that piece of media for life. If you aggressively read something, great, people can go experience the media that way, but they should keep it to that. Taking that idea onto Bloodborne, I should say this. It's easier for an aggressive reading to take hold in that way when there isn't already an obvious interpretation it has to displace. Luckily, I don't have to worry about that because Bloodborne is notoriously easy to understand with clear plot and obvious, uncomplicated lore, right? Section 3. What the fuck is going on in Bloodborne?
When the carcass of Cos washed up on the coast, its insides were teeming with tiny parasites, unlike any found in humans.
Making contacts with eldritch forces is a blessing, but even if it
The
drops...
coat is the use value that satisfies a particular want. Its existence is the result of a special sort of productive activity, the nature of which is determined by its aim, mode of operation, subject...
Vapor adds value, no. 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 No!
You start Bloodborne by joining the Yharnam hunt. Yharnamites are hunting beasts. The beasts used to be people like them, but something called the Old Blood has transformed them. The hunters are hunting beasts and the hunters are becoming beasts too, and since you've begun by taking a transfusion of the Old Blood, so are you. As with any Soulsborne game, you get used to just dying and dying and dying. You'll even be standing around and just admiring the view, and a fucking dark portal will just scoop you up to space and deal you a bunch of damage for no reason and then throw you back down. And since you're so used to dying, you don't think twice about it. After you've killed a few different bosses in Bloodborne, you'll make it to Rom the Spider, a big mama spider with lots of horrid babies. Look away at this point if you don't want to see horrid spider babies. Defeating Rom is a wild ride. You see, Rom was, by some magic, holding back the true nature of the world. Rom was keeping you from seeing them, the Great Ones. These huge creatures, perhaps cosmic beings or chthonic entities, have been watching you and everyone else all along. That spooky dark portal that scoops you up, that was a Great One picking you up in its hand and crushing you. The truly brilliant thing about the way this twist works is you can see the Great Ones before you defeat Rom if you have enough insight, which is an in-game currency and points system. However, when you can't see them yet and you get scooped up in Cathedral Ward, there's actually a faint outline of a hand just holding you up. You just weren't looking to see it, so you probably missed it the first time. And that's just insanely cool! After the main bosses, you kill Murgo, an infant Great One. This was your mission all along. You were really working for yet another Great One, known as the Moon Presence. Or, if you're a real fan like me and you know its real, much scarier name, Flora. At this point you can be executed and reawaken in Yharnam having forgotten everything, resist and defeat Gurman, and then Flora turns you into the new Gurman. Or, if you found certain special items in the game, you can fight Flora and wake up as a tiny alien squid baby. Dan Olsen made a video a little while ago about the deceptive endings of Bloodborne. What initially seems like the best ending, reawakening in Yharnam as yourself, is perhaps the worst, and it all depends on your point of view. The game models insight, which I mentioned before, as a kind of madness following the Lovecraftian tradition that someone who learns the deeper truths of the universe would seem mad to everyone else. With that in mind, the ending where you reawaken in Yharnam as a hunter is one where you have no insight anymore. The ending where you become Gurman allows you to escape that cycle, but it leaves you in a different trap. That third ending, although you sacrifice your humanity, allows you to become one of the creatures who actually affect change in the world. It allows you agency and perhaps control. So there are your three endings: working in service of the Great Ones, becoming a middleman to them, or joining that upper level of existence. Here's where we can start with our aggressive reading. 3 classes. Okay, now I sound crazy. Or do I just have a higher insight score than you? The rich and powerful control the actions of the working class in myriad ways. Politically, if you make changes to healthcare, education, workers' rights, the benefit, anything that the government is basically supposed to provide, you're going to affect the actions of the working class. To me, the invisible, interdimensional creatures manipulating workers into slaughtering each other as they continuously imbibe a supposedly magical cure-all from the creatures that ultimately only makes the situation worse. Yeah, that reads pretty smoothly as a class system metaphor. The primary currency system in Bloodborne is blood echoes. It's pretty funny considering that blood, sweat and tears is the idiom we have for labour when we want to conceptualize labour as infused with its product. If you've read Capital, the one takeaway lesson, if nothing else you get, is that only labour can create value. So if value can only come from labour and Bloodborne's currency system is blood, I don't know. I just think if I had an alien ask me, what's a class system? How does that work? I'd say, oh, it's just like fucking Bloodborne. And they'd say, what's a Bloodborne? And I'd say, oh, fuck, you're an alien. And I'd realise I have loads more explaining to do. The metaphor goes deeper than that though, and I mean deeper. There's a second optional quest to the game, working through the Tumerian Chalice dungeons. These are dungeons deep beneath Yharnam, full of exceptionally horrid critters. In one of the dungeons there's another Great One called Abritus. Great Ones are worshipped and revered, but for whatever reason, she is trapped in the dungeons. I see the dungeons, which are supposed to give you a window into Yharnam's past, as a perfect extension of the metaphor, because what came before Yharnam looks just like what came before capitalism. Serfdom, worship, belief in higher powers and theocratic societies and hereditary monarchy. Though, as a Brit, it is my duty to see an allegory for the monarchy in any video game I play. But as a socialist, it's my duty to compare the Queen to a tentacle monster from space living underground, worshipped by a cult of the undead. It works really well for me that the same Great Ones who were ruling over the Tumerians now rule over Yharnam, but in secret, because, again, that reads just smoothly like what happened when capitalism started to become popular. As the world industrialized, the power structures underneath the top level reorganized and society became something totally new, but the old blood changed very little. In Bloodborne, a group of scholars who study the Great Ones have a mantra.
Fear the old blood.
There's a rich and full lore to Bloodborne, and I shouldn't really go any further without giving credit to Vati Vidya, without whom I would honestly not understand a single thing about Bloodborne beyond the basic plot. I've watched hours and hours of his content, which I've been kind of writing off as valid research for this video, but he and other people like him spend so many hours more researching by looking into game files, reading every single item description, and talking to characters while wearing different costumes to try trigger new responses. From Software don't like to just lay things out plainly. You could go through Bloodborne and get to the end and not really get the big picture. If you want to understand things better, you really have to engage, and the more you engage, the more you get out. It's a strange thing to do, to deny your players easy access to information, to create a rich lore but then withhold it unless the player puts in loads of effort to read item descriptions and so on. Or at least it's strange until you discover that From Software are really big fans of J.R.R. Tolkien and H.P. Lovecraft. I mean, credit to them, they made a medieval fantasy series where you have to do a silly amount of walking, and a cosmic horror game where you don't understand anything that's going on and you feel like a tiny stupid insect, so good job guys, I'm sure they'd both be proud.
Most of the player's first half hour in the Nightmare of Mensis, the final major chunk of the game, is going to be spent yelling, "What's even killing me?" as the player is bombarded by insanity rays from this lighthouse. In White Trash, a 400-year history of class in America, Nancy Eisenberg talks about the conditions of the colonies during the foundational era of America. America has long clung to a myth that it does not have the class system. There's an idea of a country founded on equality and freedom where anyone can become totally self-made. This is hysterically untrue. The colonies of America were a place for Europe largely to just send people it didn't want anymore, to do labour it didn't want to do in order to turn land that it owned but didn't want anymore into profitable land instead. In 1630, John White wrote, "Colonies ought to be emunctories or sinks of state to drain away the filth." Nancy Eisenberg writes that in 1608 someone described the poor in London as dirty and disfigured monsters living in caves. When I read that, the first thing I saw in my mind was the Yharnam members of the Hunt. Around the same time, the 1610s, someone moving to America could gain 50 acres of land per servant they brought, and it didn't matter if the servants survived the journey. Someone would be made incredibly wealthy in exchange for basically removing the idle poor from European cities. Debtors, addicts, or even children could just be kidnapped from the streets and sold into the Navy or into indentured service and sent to America. It's worth pointing out that an enemy roaming the streets in Bloodborne is the kidnapper. There are tons of kidnappers carrying sacks, as they genuinely would have done in the 16 and 1700s.
There are parts of this allegory that I think fit really well because of the nature of the Lovecraftian genre that From Software wanted Bloodborne to fit into. The industrial era setting, the feeling of oppressive conspiracy,
Oh, for fuck's sake, I hate this stupid fucking game! Why does anyone play it? I hate it so
I can see the pony, I just can't get on the pony.
Can you parachute?
Maybe. Bum 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 bum. Yeah! Another element that fits the allegory really well, to my mind anyway, is the third ending. The way you get the third ending and become the tiny alien squid baby is to collect 3 of a special item throughout the game and consume them. The odds of you completing the game that way without knowing to look for it are minuscule, and the most likely thing that happened if you did manage that was that you started the game with some additional knowledge. It's ironic that climbing up the metaphorical social ladder was only really achieved by most people because they took part in a community around the game. Most people who got the third ending will have found out how to through shared knowledge, therefore through people working together. Maybe your feelings about the 3 endings do depend on your philosophy, your preference between humanity and power. But I think we can all agree, none of them are what you call ideal. The best outcome would be that your new world wasn't secretly controlled by alien squids, and that hunters didn't murder each other all the time, and that Gehrman wasn't trapped in a dream. Wouldn't it be nicer if everyone just left the old blood behind? I don't necessarily blame the Great Ones, by the way, even if I talk about the system as them manipulating people. Certainly some of them are malevolent and some of them aren't, but I don't hate the rich for being rich, I just don't think they should be. I hate when rich and powerful people are shitheads. Unfortunately, rich and powerful people are shitheads most of the time. It's a bit anticlimactic, isn't it? Me not building to a conclusion where I say eat the rich. It would work better if I was sticking to blaming this secret shadowy group who are manipulating society, wouldn't it? Well, the problem is, there are some people who would like it better if I were blaming all society's problems on one secret, shadowy, powerful group. I'm sorry guys, I've got to talk about Nazis again. Section 4. Madness. The secondary currency in Bloodborne is insight.
But you know what I like a lot more than materialistic things? Knowledge.
In the Lovecraftian tradition, as I said before, madness is a perceived state of being and not an illness or internal condition. People appear mad to others who simply have not discovered the truth.
Knowledge.
In his book Madness and Civilization, Michel Foucault points out that in the past, before the advent of sanitariums to essentially remove the insane population from the sane, the concept of madness was seen very differently. Madness used to be a state that potentially anyone could go through at any point. With this point of view, the Lovecraftian dichotomy between madness and, as Bloodborne models it, insight, doesn't seem unreasonable. The mad are simply people with a different point of view. When you take your transfusion of the old blood, you see a vision of your beastly self reaching out to you. After you fight the first mini-boss, the cleric beast, you gain 1 insight and you can see the doll in the hunter's dream as alive. Consume an item called Madman's Knowledge and gain more. 50 insight and you'll see new enemies. 40 insight and you can see the Great Ones before you defeat Rom. 50 insight and the game actually changes the musical score in the hunter's dream. 60 insight and the sound of a baby crying follows you everywhere you go. 100 insight and Hidetaka Miyazaki watches you every night while you sleep. The reason to discuss and think about this model of insight against madness, I think, has to do with understanding why other people have different points of view and different political beliefs. How many times have you seen someone you disagree with talking about their political beliefs and reached for the word crazy to describe it? I certainly know there's a huge trend among right-wing and even centrist dickheads to describe leftism as a mental disorder. Leftist YouTuber Angie Speaks just made a video about conspiracy culture, which is really good. It got me thinking about how the actual way capitalism functions, the oppression of workers, would read as a crazy conspiracy to someone if they didn't believe it. It also made me think about how easily you could believe other conspiracy theories if you had some of the information and not all of it. It would be like having some amount of insight, enough to make the game harder and scarier, but not enough to properly understand what's going on. The kind of conspiracies that you might be drawn to believe if you can see that the world is wrong, but can't see how, or see that some people get all the money and power, but don't understand who, are extremely harmful. I'm talking about the deep state conspiracy, white genocide, Nazism, the alt-right conspiracy theories that SJWs are taking over universities. People who believe those things could make the same aggressive reading of Bloodborne that I've made, just inserting their views instead. They would maybe claim that the invisible monsters manipulating the hunt are Jewish elites, or Obama, or blue-haired SJWs, or Hillary Clinton. I think a lot that when people learn information and that information changes their point of view, it's like the discussion around Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. The common misconception that the creature in Frankenstein is called Frankenstein has led to lots of people smugly informing others, actually, Frankenstein is the doctor, not the monster. I think there are three people in that situation. People who think Frankenstein is the monster, people who know Frankenstein's the doctor, and people who get that Dr. Frankenstein is the monster. The people believing that a secret cabal of Jews control the media, or that SJWs are ruining society, those people know that Frankenstein is the doctor. They have some of the facts, some of the understanding of how power, class, and money interact in the world, but the fact they know something, and they know that they know something, lets them think they're totally right. They've got 15 insight and they think they understand the whole entire game. The thing is, having all the insight in the world isn't going to be enough. In fact, it might just make the world seem scarier and leave you to draw the wrong conclusions entirely. The lore is out there if you want to put in the effort, reading item descriptions and wearing a cauliflower head to talk to the villager in the DLC just so he'll recite a little poem for you. If you're still wondering about the allegory at this point, the villager would be Zizek, and the poem is,
I already am eating from the trash can all the time.
You have to read and learn and make that effort. You have to share what you know and be willing to receive ideas from other people, just not hateful ones. Section 5. The Canary. Commuting is one of the times, if you have a job, especially a job that you don't like very much, that you really feel like a small piece in a large machine. Some people commute in different ways to make it more fun, and I think a part of that really has to do with not feeling like you're just part of the crowd. The setting of Bloodborne is powerful because the misery is pungent and obvious, but at the same time, the system can remain hidden, at least until the big reveal. Similarly, I can go to a place like Canary Wharf, near where I live, and there isn't really one thing I can point my camera at and say, look, a capitalism! Canary Wharf is really bizarre, and there's lots to do with private ownership of public spaces and the bizarre design I could get into, but there just isn't time. So consider this. These guys aren't police officers. Police in the UK look like this. These guys are private security. I promise, seriously, they're not police. Those kinds of design elements make places like that really weird in ways you can't quite pin down. Because like I said, you can't point to the source of it all. That's why it can be helpful to have a good metaphor or allegory. Places like Canary Wharf are so soulless and grey and depressing, and the kind of architecture that demonstrates wealth and power but also cold efficiency is probably what our era looks like in the collective cultural mind's eye. If there was a modern set Soulsborne game, maybe it would take place in a city of glass and steel and concrete and plazas with unimaginative, curated greenery. Maybe the stock enemies would just be men in suits, your own custom Adam Driver versus 1,000 haunted, demonic, Phoenix Wright ace attorneys. Doom 2016 had some explicit anti-corporate themes, but also the entire game could be read in a similar way to what I did here, an anti-capitalist metaphor. It contains the same kind of divide and conquer, workers tearing each other apart nightmare as Bloodborne. And the reason is, basically, Capitalism is that specific kind of nightmare, and so it's a specific kind of scary story we relate to. H-Bomber made a video about Lovecraft that covered this stuff pretty well, but just sticking to aggressive readings and the value of seeing this capitalist metaphor for a second, I'd say that if people want to understand the nightmare that capitalism is, a lot of games turn out to be a useful metaphor, just especially Bloodborne. When you play most games, you and a bunch of other low-level mooks fight and kill each other until you rise up to the level where you can take on the boss. In God Bless You, Mr. Rosewater by Kurt Vonnegut, millionaire adult son of the Rosewater family, Elliot Rosewater, has gone totally crazy and wants to help people instead of just managing his family fortune forever. When his father comes to find him and talk him out of it, they have an exchange that really lays bare a central idea of the book. I think it's terrible the way people don't share things in this country. The least a government could do, it seems to me, is divide things up fairly among the babies. There's plenty for everybody in this country, if only we'd share more. And what do you think that would do to incentive? Oh, you mean fright about not getting enough to eat? About not being able to pay the doctor? About not being able to give your family nice clothes, a safe, cheerful, comfortable place to live, a decent education, and a few good times? You mean shame about not knowing where the Money River is? The what? The Money River, where the wealth of nation flows. We were born on the banks of it. We can slurp from that mighty river to our heart's content, and we even take slurping lessons so we can slurp more efficiently. Slurping lessons from lawyers, from tax consultants. We were born close enough to the river to drown ourselves in the next 10 generations in wealth, simply using dippers and buckets, but we still hire the experts to teach us the use of aqueducts, dams, reservoirs, siphons, bucket brigades, and the Archimedes screw, and our teachers in turn become rich, and their children become buyers of lessons in slurping. It's still possible for an American to make a fortune on his own. Oh, sure, provided somebody tells him when he's young enough that there is a money river, and that there's nothing fair about it, and that he damn well better forget about hard work and the merit system and honesty and all that crap, and get to where the river is. Go where the rich and powerful are, I'd tell him, and learn their ways. They can be flattered and they can be scared. Please them enormously or scare them enormously, and one moonless night they will put their fingers to their lips, warning you not to make a sound. And they will lead you through the dark to the widest, deepest river of wealth ever known to man. You'll be shown a place on the riverbank and handed a bucket all your own. Slurp as much as you want, but try to keep the racket of your slurping down. A poor man might hear. Vonnegut was a socialist and a humanist. He believed in the power of people working together and looking out for each other. He didn't want us to carry on holding power at the top of some arbitrary system, pretending that that system was just and right and absolute. A system, quite like the system of power in Bloodborne. I guess what I'm saying is, if we work together, we can get the best ending. Not one where we as individuals join the group at the top. Something better than that. This essay was definitely my wildest hot take forcibly crammed into a video game so far. But I think the full text version on Patreon is even wilder because I had to cut a lot of it down. So if for some reason you enjoyed what you just watched, please subscribe and consider supporting Curio on Patreon. You'll have access to all the text versions of the essays as well as some fun rewards, one of which is actually a secret. Speaking of Patreon, I'd like to thank my current patrons, both for their money and for tweeting at me to keep me company night and day while I made this video. I'd like to thank Hann The Mann, who makes the fantastic music for Curio, and who made 3 new tracks for the Halloween Spooktacular. I'd also like to thank you, the viewer, for watching all the way to the end. The next big essay won't be out for a while, but I have some smaller videos planned while I make that one really polished. If you need more Curio in the meantime, I'm on Twitter, where you can tweet at me that I've misunderstood Bloodborne, all of politics, and death of the author. See you next time!
But you know what I like a lot more than materialistic things? Knowledge.